Oh, hello friends. So great to see so many of you here today. I'm Michał Dudak, and I'll talk a little bit about creating great user interfaces. Who doesn't want their UI to feel great? Yeah, I thought so. Me too. And actually, I don't build applications. I build a tool that enables applications to have great UI. And together with these smart folks at MUI, we've been cooking Base UI, an unstyled component library. Can I see some hands if you used Base UI? Nice, awesome, thank you. So for almost 2 years, we've been building this, and as the library caters for the needs of the most demanding developers and design engineers, we've had to discover and learn a good number of techniques and UI patterns, and I want to share some of these learnings with you today. These are the components that we have currently in the library, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll focus on just a few. So, what's the problem here? Let's say you have a good-looking UI. It looks great in Figma, but when you implement this, something might not exactly feel right. You might be missing something. So what's this secret ingredient that's preventing your good application, your good UI, to be great? And it might be that your UI is missing some small details, some small interactions that are really not noticeable consciously by most users. But if they're not there, or if they're, even worse, implemented incorrectly, users will notice and it will degrade the experience. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's start with a drop-down menu. Pretty simple, right? You click on the trigger, you move your mouse over the item, you click on it again. But if your users are familiar with patterns of operating systems, they know that this isn't the only way to interact with a menu. So more, let's say, power users can use this click, drag, and release technique. And if they're familiar with this from operating systems, they might want your UI to have this as well. If you implement this, they will feel at home with your UI. Another thing, like speaking about familiarity with operating system patterns, here's where they differ between operating systems. So you can see two examples of a select menu. On macOS, the popover appears in such a way that the currently active item covers the trigger. On Windows, the pop-up usually appears below the trigger. So again, if you want your UI to be more familiar to users, you might want to implement a OS check and then render a different UI to different users. How to make users more productive? Avoid unnecessary delays in the UI. So in this case, we have a tooltip, and tooltips naturally have delays. Like if we removed delays from tooltips, they would start appearing everywhere, and it wouldn't help productivity at all. But if we have a couple of related tooltip triggers, like icon triggers in this example, and the user opens one of the tooltips and hovers over another trigger from this group, they shouldn't have to wait another like 500 milliseconds or so. They are already in the tooltip reading mode, so let's display this additional tooltip immediately. Now, chances are your users are human beings. And human beings tend to not be perfect at all times. So it may happen that while moving from one trigger to another, they move their mouse away from all triggers for a fraction of a second. It shouldn't matter. Your UI should consider this and accept the fact that users aren't always precise and not restore this delay. And this is super important. It's extremely beneficial, but at the same time, very tricky to capture users' intent instead of simply their actions directly. And this applies to all components and UI elements. I know we have, like the DOM events is everything we got to react to, but we need to interpret these events to distill the intent of the user and not treat them like directly and account for users not being very precise at all times. And another example of this is the popover. So popovers can open and hover, just like tooltips, but they can also open and click. And if you have both of these interaction modes enabled, you may run into some problems. So let's say the user intent is to open the popover and click. So they move their mouse over the trigger, they click, but like a fraction of a second before they clicked, the popover opens on hover. And if you implemented it incorrectly, it will disappear immediately because they will trigger, if they click, they will change the state from open to close again. So you should also, again, consider this and have your UI components treat clicks that happen immediately after open events caused by hover differently. Also, when you close the popover, or closing the popover should depend on the method used to open it. So if the popover was open on click, you should require a click event to close it. If it's open on hover, it should be enough to just hover out of it to close it. Now a dialog, and specifically nested dialogs. Here it's a good idea to notify the user somehow that there's something more waiting for their input once they're done with the current dialog. And a common way of doing this is to display the bottommost dialog scaled down a bit, so it peeks out from below or above the topmost dialog. If you add a subtle animation to it, you'll achieve a nice effect, and it will get the job done. And now moving on to more complex components, this is a number field, and it supports different kinds of interactions. So obviously, you can just type in the number. You can press the increment-decrement buttons. And you can also use arrow keys to change the value. Or you can use, or in addition to arrow keys, you can use modifier keys like Shift to increment the value by a larger step. But more sophisticated apps, especially design-related apps, enable additional modes of operation, of interaction. So you can scrub, meaning you press and hold your mouse button, move your mouse, and the value updates immediately. You may run into some problems with this, especially if you reach the edge of the viewport, and it doesn't allow you to scrub more. And there are ways to overcome this. You can still enable scrubbing once the cursor reaches the edge of the viewport. You can freeze the cursor in place and not move it at all once you start scrubbing. Or, as shown here, you can teleport the cursor once it travels a certain distance. And last example, probably my favorite because I spent so much time recently working on this, are popovers, multiple popovers. So usually, when you have multiple popovers, you render a different pop-up element for each one of them, but it's not the only way. You can reuse the same pop-up element and just change the content, animating the width, height, and position of the container element. It looks really cool, and it may have a positive effect on performance, because for data-heavy applications, let's say you have a grid with 100 of items, and each item is associated with like 3 popovers, then instead of having 300 popovers, 300 React components, you just have one, and reuse the same element and just change the content. And this is not only used in tooltips. The same pattern can be used in other components as well. So for example, Google Calendar uses this pattern to show event details, and this is my take on the calendar. And as you can see, events are shown in a way that considers the amount of space that's available on each side of the trigger element. And I could go on and on. These were just a couple of examples that we built when creating base UI. Obviously, I'm biased, and I think you should all use base UI. But it can be fun to craft these interactions on your own, especially if you have a lot of time. So whether you're using a library or not, keep in mind that these little details can massively influence your user's experience. All these demos are available on my GitHub. I'm Michał Dudak, and have a great rest of the conference.